everybody. My name is Peter Trippi. I'm editor-in-chief of Fine Art Connoisseur Magazine. I'm based in New York City, and I am delighted to welcome you to another informal conversation among kindred spirits. These are remarkable colleagues in the art world who have gathered together with Zoom during the crazy pandemic time in which we live to talk about issues in our field. I want to especially shout out to my co-host, Katie Whipple, an artist in New York City. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Peter. Good to be with you.
This is great. We're doing it again. It's a pleasure. This was really Katie's idea, and we just decided to move forward with this. This is being produced by Streamline Publishing, which is the parent company of Fine Art Connoisseur, and we're thrilled to distribute these conversations out into the world for free. We're extra excited by the participation of our three guests, and I thought it might be smart to introduce ourselves. That way we're not putting words into anybody's mouth. I'll just do my own again, and that is to say that I'm Peter Trippi. I live in New York. I'm also an independent curator of exhibitions focused primarily on 19th century art. Katie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Whipple. I am a painter, mostly of flowers, as you can see behind me. And I also kind of help and work for Grand Central Atelier, where I am chair of development. And I am also based in New York City. And I'm really excited to be here with everybody having another chat.
Perfect. Dina, tell us about yourself.
Hey, Peter, Katie, thank you so much for having me here. So I'm a painter, mostly, and also curator when I have, when there's a possibility to curate anything. And also, I actually also do a little bit of work for Grand Central Atelier. I'm their Instagram witch, I think, or wizard. So I also teach a little bit.
Great. Richie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Richie Carter, and yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. It's a thrill to be here and to meet Dina and Robert as well. I am a painter, an oil painter primarily, and I'm up in the quiet northwest corner of Montana. So I just reside here and paint full time.
Great. And last but not least, Robert.
Hi, Robert Simon, and I'm based in New York as well. I may be the odd person out in that I'm a miserable painter when I deign to paint, but I'm an art dealer and mostly involved with old master paintings. My specialty as an academic as well as a gallerist, although I have a great passion for contemporary realism. Show a few artists on occasion, have done some exhibitions in association with the Grand Central Atelier, and have a deep-rooted connection, which I think is borne out by the connection between the old masters through the 19th century to the artists that are working today.
That's great, absolutely, and we applaud your work in building those bridges for people to see more clearly what those connections are. That's very valuable indeed. One of the premises of these conversations has been to bring in not only artists, but also people working in allied fields like galleries and ateliers, to say that we're all in this together. As the slogan goes, it's truly a community in which we live. And this is such an exciting time in the world of contemporary realism, figuration, representation, whatever you want to call it, and we are all very concerned together about how this is going to go forward. That these are strange economic times, and we want to make sure that everybody feels heard and connected. So this is just one more way of doing it, to hear from each other. So we'll get into a deeper conversation after the presentations, but now I'd like to invite Dina to tell us a bit about her beautiful slides. Dale, our technician, is going to put the slides up on the screen, and we can have a look and learn more. There they go. Okay. Like magic. I love PowerPoint. So there's Dina's name. And there's the first slide.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. So this is a drawing from my Secret Life of Trees project from a few years ago. And it was I started it when I was pregnant with my first child, and basically my life before parenthood, I was incredibly just active. I was on my bicycle all the time, and I would, what I would do when I had free time was take my bike and, take it somewhere in Europe and ride through several countries. And all of a sudden I couldn't do that anymore. And I was limited to walks, and then walks around my neighborhood. And then once the baby was born, I barely left the apartment at all for a while. So I started drawing trees, and that was kind of part of a way to deal with the lack of mobility. Because what I could do is, go outside and draw a tree. And then actually, as I started putting them up on Instagram, the beginning of that project, and it basically documents my pregnancy and the first probably 6 months of my son's life in tree drawings. So when I had the baby, people actually started sending me tree photos from wherever they were in the world, and with stories of what happened kind of under that tree. And some of them were really beautiful, like like someone proposed to their girlfriend, who's now their wife that they've been married to for 20 years, or or conversely, someone's someone is buried under this tree that this person loves. So people started sending me stories and photos, and it made me feel like I was still traveling, despite the fact that for a while my mobility was incredibly limited. So for me, these drawings kind of have a special place as kind of a memory of that year. And if you want to move on to the next slide. And this is actually a very, very recent painting. I did this right before the quarantine started, when I just went back to oil painting after several years of ballpoint and gouache, basically because my kids were old enough to be in daycare. And oil painting is it's my first love, and it's kind of what I was doing the entire time before I became a parent. And for a while I couldn't do it because I don't know, the solvents were toxic, and the kind of time I needed. It's a tiny painting, which probably took me about 80 hours. So, so this is one of the very few oil paintings that I finished from the moment that I started painting again to when I got quarantined with my two very small kids who no longer have childcare, and went back to ballpoint pen drawing and gouache. So it's I made the sketch for it initially in the Arboretum in Boston. I just moved to Boston after 15 years in New York. So I had a sketch of that tree, and I had a bunch of photographs. And it was the first time I was in New York for 15 years, where for those of you who live there, trees don't really change colors. They just, they just kind of stay green. And then a big, I've always had this idea that a big machine comes one night and takes all the leaves off the trees in the fall. So it's really the first change of seasons I'd seen in a very long time. And I was just so enamored by how bright the colors get. And for those of you who are not in New York, I understand that, change of seasons is not, is not all that exotic, but for me it was. So this one is currently on display at a show that I helped curate at Sugarlift Gallery that Katie's work is actually in. That opened last night, and it's a totally, it's a wonderful show that I'm kind of really proud of having participated in. And you can go on to the next. And this was, so this is a kind of a larger ballpoint pen drawings that I've been working on and off since probably last fall, and I still feel like it's, I'm actually thinking of going back to the place I started it today to put some finishing touches on it. So it's just a tree that I was kind of sitting next to. So my tree drawing project ended, several years ago, but I never lost the love of, now every time I see a tree, I basically see it as a potential, I see it as a potential drawing or as a potential painting. And every once in a while I follow through on it. And I feel like I kind of being able to just sit and stare at something and draw is such a pleasure and a luxury, and almost one of the the privileges of being an artist. I mean, I do use photography for my work, but being able to draw from life is completely amazing, and nothing really replaces it. So when I can, I do, when I can, I do that. I feel like the quarantine has actually made me much more reliant on either photos or things that are just lying around the house that I can draw. I think I've had a lot of drawings of apples recently, but just because it's something that I have on me all the time. But in any case, now that I think we can get out a little bit more, that's my plan for the rest of the day. It's to go out and kind of just finish up this drawing. And this one's on display at a show. It's a fundraiser that I put together at the Blue Review Project Space. And so half the money from everything goes to the Masks for Doctors Fund, which is something I got involved in. It's basically a fundraiser to raise money for PPE supplies. For first, it was just doctors, but now it's just all essential workers who kind of, I think most doctors are actually okay for masks right now, but there's still a lot of people who work in hospitals that aren't. And it was kind of the trees that I've wanted to put together, the tree drawing shows that I've wanted to put together for a really long time. So it was all my favorite tree artists. And you can keep going. Am I talking too much, too little? Okay, so and this is the other oil paintings that I finished, and this one's called Dead End Street, and it's just a little street kind of next to where I live, and a fence. And I remember I've walked past it and just took it for granted so many times. And then at some point, I think the light was shining on it just the right way, and I realized how incredibly beautiful and eerie this totally kind of commonplace thing is. And I was thinking, I just started oil painting again, and I was thinking that if I can kind of catch that moment when something really quotidian starts seeming beautiful, and if I can make other people see that, then I'll have achieved what I wanted to do. So this is oil on copper, which has been my favorite thing to paint on recently, because it just like I feel like paintings on copper hold up kind of, for one thing, there's actually less preparation, and they hold up for several, a few hundred or thousand, probably, these paintings will all outlive me. And I remember just being at the Met and falling completely in love with the surface of some of these, 15th century, 16th century copper paintings, which just, I mean, they look like they were done yesterday, and there was something so kind of enamel-like about them. And all the paintings next to them on panel and on canvas were all cracked because, people were experimenting with different mediums, but copper held up perfectly. And I was thinking that this is very good for someone who's incredibly lazy about their surface preparation like me, and for whom sanding twice and putting 10 layers of gesso on something, and then maybe shellacking it seems like a lot of work, which is probably how most of you guys work. But in any case, and then I kind of fell in love with the way that copper held up to oil paint, and how each layer kind of allows you to go deeper and get more detailed than the layer before. Yeah. And this one's also at Sugarlift and the Biophilia exhibition. And I guess you can kind of click on the next slide. And this one is currently in my studio, but it's also from the Secret Life of Trees project. It's a New York tree that was kind of very close to where I was living at the time. And I remember just being able to go there with the stroller, walk the baby to sleep, and have, 40 minutes or an hour and a half if I was very, very lucky to work on that drawing. It was near Tompkins Square Park, and I still, I remember it as a special time where it was both kind of very difficult, but because all of a sudden I had a lot less time to paint and draw and just, shower than I had previously, while also kind of figuring out this whole new phase in life, and actually realizing that I don't stop being an artist just because I have less time to do it. So this one's in my studio, and anything that sells through my studio right now, I'll donate half the money to the Masks for Doctors Fund, because I feel like that's one of the not very many ways that I can feel like I'm useful throughout all this.
That's fantastic, Dina. I think it's great that you're calling our attention to these events, these initiatives that are supporting healthcare workers and other essential workers. That's really moving. And indeed, I'd like to come back to that later as a group to talk about what's going on in our time regarding the connections between art and philanthropy. Thank you. Congratulations on all those wonderful images.
Thank you, Peter.
Great. Okay, we'll move to Richie's slides now. Richie.
All right. Well, Dina, thank you for sharing. Your work is incredible. Seeing the size and the scale is what kind of is mind-boggling to me, and the detail and just using even a ballpoint pen to like create such a beautiful image it's really stunning. So thank you for sharing. So here is the first piece that I decided to show, and well, up here in Montana, we have a lot of scenes that look like this with very little human interaction, I guess. And so this is a wildfire if you never seen one. And primarily, I mean, being from Montana, my first love is definitely landscape painting. So that's what you will see most of. And this scene here, I titled it Bleeding Light, because if you've ever seen a forest fire, when the smoke fills the atmosphere, the sun actually turns bright red and it looks like it's bleeding. And there's something, my work is very emotive, and I'm a very emotive person, and I kind of just realized that started to shine through in my paintings. And so I was sitting at the edge of this lake watching the wildfire come through, and I was, overwhelmed by how distant and how small these flames seem to be. And yet they were so powerful and destructive and causing so much damage. And yet somehow that damage and destruction is necessary. And I'm just always kind of caught between these two things. It's like, why does this have to happen? Yet there's so much life and creation that comes out of it. So that's what this piece is kind of about. And I mean, it's pretty fitting. I painted about a year ago, but it's quite fitting for the times that we find ourselves in, even right now. I think the last year and a half has been pretty tumultuous, I would say, throughout the whole world. And this painting kind of just reminds me to find beauty in these times when things do have to get broken down, whatever that may be, whatever loss that might look like, but that there's this beauty in it, but then there's also this beauty that can be found beyond that. And this piece particularly was in a solo show I did a year ago. And I also, I'm really interested in doing other mediums. And so I do a lot of music. And so I wrote music for a couple of these paintings that you'll see. And I wrote a song titled Bleeding Light that pulls a lot of imagery from World War I and World War II, and these big historical moments that are quite destructive, and so much comes out of them. So this is one of those pieces that was an experiment, I guess, with adding an element of sound and music to further pull out, tell a story, I guess, and pull out emotion in an exhibition and among viewers. So we can go to the next slide. This is also titled Bleeding Light, as you can see, and this work was done previous to the one that you just saw. And for a long time, I like to work in series, so I kind of exhaust a whole idea in my head, and I paint it so many times until I feel like I can move on finally. And this was one of the earlier works in the Bleeding Light series. So this is typically what the sun does look like when the smoke fills the atmosphere, and it becomes this deep orange red that, for me, I just thought that title Bleeding Light was so perfect and fitting for what is happening, because there's this pain that is happening, and then it also has this beauty about it. And this was the first painting that I felt I really finally captured that glow. Technically with paint and trying to get that light to read right, it took me quite a while, and this was the first piece that I felt successfully did that. You can go to the next slide. So both of these pieces I've shown there in the text below, you can see they're available at different galleries, and I've shown them at different times. So this image here, this is the largest piece I have created. It's 4 feet by 5.5. It's so difficult to tell scale, you know, like seeing Dina's work, at first I was like, wow, like these, you know, these could be this big, or then I saw the inches and I'm like, whoa, they're this big. And it's almost more incredible when you do see that scale. So this one is quite large. And this was also in my show, and I wrote music for this piece as well. It's called Last to Leave Here. I'm really interested in talking about relationship, whether that's between humans, or that we have with the land, or that the land has with itself, the animals, you know, in here there are bison in here. What is their relationship with the land? And I'm interested in having a dialogue with, you know, the past of our environment, that we have with our environment, and the present and the future. Within the Western genre, I guess you could say some of these fall into, but it's really about talking about the West in a contemporary context. So in here you have these bison, which nowadays they're very few wild herds, where they once roamed the entire plains in herds of millions. And then you have this road that just lightly cuts across the bottom and veers back into the composition on the left side. And in the very distant, there's some headlights. I started adding in these secondary light sources that actually have become one of my most, the elements that I'm actually most drawn to. You know, when we think about landscape painting, it's like, oh, paint the light and the effect it has on it. And I love that. I love always painting this kind of last light or first light, but really interested in throwing in a secondary light source. And I found that it's a departure point, or a invitation, I guess, for a viewer to approach it somehow easier and find something very familiar. I mean, who, especially in the West, but in America, who doesn't have some sort of rapport with headlights? So you can see the headlights approaching in this road in the background, this bison herd, and then a skull in the very front, kind of center right below the 2 bison there. There's a skull of the bison, and that skull is actually what the piece is all about. It's the tiniest element, but it's about, you know, that skull is kind of the spirit of the West, is what I kind of have coined it. And it's the last thing that will leave this scene. It's the one thing that will actually remain in the West, when the bison was actually near extinction at the beginning of the 20th century. So yeah, just a conversation with history and the Western landscape. We can go to the next slide. Okay, this is the most recent painting that I have created. I just finished it a few weeks ago to put it in a group show down in Tucson, Arizona at Settlers West Gallery. And I've painted a lot. Like I said, I kind of go through a subject matter and try to exhaust it until I have nothing left to say. So I've been painting these road scenes. In the West, that's what connects all of us here. We all have to have cars or multiple cars. And there's the secondary light source I'm throwing in with the house and the headlights, but also that first light on the mountains in the background. And this piece is just about relationship, and the title, I Will Go If You Ask Me, I Will Stay If You Dare. It's from one of my favorite musicians, Gregory Alan Isakov, and just talking about, you know, a relationship between people. There's no actual people in the image, but there's a narrative of people, who's driving the car, who is in the house, and how do they relate? Is the person leaving? Is the person going into the house? What's actually happening here? But once again, just really drawn to that early or last light. Next slide. And the last image that I have put here is not of mine. I share a studio. This is my studio here, but I share it with landscape painter Kenneth Yaris. And we shared a studio for about 4 to 5 years. And neither of us would be the painter that we've grown into without the other person being there. It's been an incredible gift to get to share a creative space and get to bounce ideas off of each other and critique each other's work, whether it's technically or conceptually. And Ken and I, we have a running joke that we call it the super brain. So we get to put 2 brains together. And I really think that's important, whether you do get to share studio space or not, but that, no artist actually creates completely in solitude. Like we're so inspired by so many, books we read, movies we see, conversations we have. And especially with another artist, like I am so inspired by Ken's work, and he's started painting these really grandiose depictions of a lot in Glacier National Park, which is right in our backyard. And he just captures this scale. Once again, you have to see this in person to really get the scale, but they're pretty remarkable to stand in front of, because it feels like when you've been out in this scene here, which I was actually with him when he got this reference for this large painting. And so, yeah, I owe a lot of my growth and success within painting to the collaboration that we've had and the sharing of a studio. Okay, next slide. All right, so there's just a few things that are kind of happening right now. In November, the hope is that we get this big show together with 100 artists, the Masters Academy of Art. It's down in Utah with Ryan Brown, and they'll send out 8x10 panels, and they'll start a bid at $600. So anything that sells from $600 to $1,200 will go to to his school to raise money for teaching and instruction. And then let's see, the second thing we have here is, it actually opened last night. It's called the Rose Show, and it's at Montana Gallery. It's a group show that my buddy Tyler Murphy, who owns the gallery, got together and has a good number of really incredible floral painters that are part of that show. So you can check that out online and see what's going on there. And then in September, I'm planning a solo show in a gallery down in Bozeman, Old Main Gallery in Bozeman, Montana. And it's a show that I've had it in my brain for about 5 years, and I've never quite had the place to show it or the guts to do this show. So I finally get to do that. So stay tuned and see what comes out.
Terrific, Richie. You're keeping busy.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Very helpful. Okay, let's move forward to Robert.
Well, greetings, everyone. First, I want to say how impressed I am both with the presentation of Dina and Richie. But I think one issue that occurred to me was just that one of the reasons that the state of contemporary realism has been a struggle and been a kind of a fight for recognition these days, is that so much of the art at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century was so accomplished, but really without great content. And hearing Dina express and tell the story and what we can see in the paintings, and the same with Ritchie, I think gives an indication of just how important and how genuine these artists' visions are, and how connected it is to the art of the past. So there's no just a pretty picture in what we've seen, and everything there's a very serious underpinning of it, which I think is understood by the viewer, and so I'm very impressed with what I'm seeing and what I've heard. So just going on with my, of course, I can't really speak with the same authority that the artists that I'm showing would be able to do. But so I'll be a little briefer about it. But we'll begin with Pamela Talese, who's a New York-based artist, whose work is basically, she works plein air and on a small scale, and mostly is best known for her scenes in New York City, not in so much in Manhattan, but in Brooklyn and Queens and the outer areas, not the glamorous parts of the city. And in the same way, when she's gone to Rome, where she's done several summers of work, she's not chosen the famous monuments of antiquity or of the Renaissance or Baroque periods, but has gone, in this case, you see, to the Foro Italico, which is the Mussolini-built stadium and environs on the outskirts of central Rome. Pamela is very much a politically minded artist, and we begin with this painting, which has a certain resonance today because there are no people in it, and so the cityscape that you see with devoid of cars, devoid of people, is very much maybe this painting was a bit of a premonition of things to come, but there's also the weight that she's trying to convey in choosing this subject of the oppressive fascist regime that built these really quite extraordinary buildings, and this obelisk that you see in the center, which is I think 60 feet high and was inscribed with Mussolini's name and Dux on it as well. But today they stand as kind of silent sentinels of a regime long past, but which I think today, as we look at governments and administrations both here and abroad, has an additional impact and weight to it. So there's a lot that is going on in a very small picture, and Pamela is one of the two contemporary artists that I'm currently showing at the gallery in New York when we can. And the next image is, we can go to that, Anthony Baus, who teaches at the Grand Central Atelier, and whose work as a draftsman and as a painter often involves architectural scenes. Also has worked quite a bit in Manhattan in drawing and in portraying some of the Beaux-Arts architecture, particularly in the great neoclassical buildings of the city, but in a very unusual and different way. Here he's taken inspiration from Roman antiquity, but in a quite a unique way, in that seeing these hyenas inhabiting the ruins of an architectural ruin, and the painting is called Time. Anthony has his own iconography, if you will, and whereas much of Renaissance and Baroque paintings that I'm familiar with are based on traditional either religious subject matter or mythological subject matter that was certainly known to the audience, Anthony's work draws on his own basic view of things that is drawn, in this case, he became fascinated with the cult of Mithras, which was a Roman cult that existed at the time of the Roman gods, but in kind of secrecy, and also combining it with hyenas, which you can rest assured do not inhabit Rome either today or in ancient times. It's hard to see, but around the neck of the hyenas are little gold keys, which have also particular symbolic quality in the course of in the nature of the picture. On to the next one, we get to our getting a little bit into the connection of what my art gallery handles and the contemporary realist world. Hugh Merrill, who is well known as an associate of Bouguereau's, different in many ways, similar in other ways, but in a picture which had at its time great resonance for its audience in portraying motherhood, portraying breastfeeding, and in a kind of sentiment, a human sentiment that had and still has, I think, a great deal of not symbolic quality so much as naturalistic appreciation of the human condition, of what we are as humans. So it's kind of a some of the problem, if we can call it that, in some 19th century painting, academic painting of the time, has been, and some of the criticism has to go into over sentimentality. I think we're at the edge here to a certain degree. I don't find it in any way over sentimental, but I do find it to be a very powerful image and very genuine. And so this is one of the works that I handling currently in the gallery. You see the change in pricing between our contemporary artists, who of course are need to live, and Hugo Merrill and the others that will follow who don't, but who have a broad secondary market, which keeps which establishes the pricing that's involved. The next artist is rather, we'll go to the next slide, and it's by two artists, a father and son pair from worked in Tuscany, and they, Gerardo Poli and Giuseppe Poli, they are painters in a way somewhat similar to Anthony's, in that drawing on architectural fantasy. And the scene that you see here is one that we may be longing for to a certain extent, a crowd in a piazza watching a play outdoors. And it's a scene from the Commedia dell'arte, but one that is in a way just as ideal and fantastic as it was reflective of what actually did go on in terms of theatrical productions in the 18th century. So lots of figures together. It's kind of like an 18th century mosh pit in front of the stage. The architecture is based on contemporary architecture, but really fantastically composed. And what's kind of nice also is that the backdrop of the stage is very much like the scene that you see behind it. So this is a cityscape of a time when we could all get together and go to the theater, and we hope it won't be too long before we can have a contemporary equivalent of it. And going on to the last slide, which is, I hope you, if any of you are watching this on a portable device you can hold over your head, because this is a ceiling painting by Tintoretto, one of the great masters of Venetian painting, and you can tell by the size of it that it is quite a substantial picture. A trompe-l'oeil painting of an allegory of music, and as one might expect for a great master as Tintoretto, and a painting that survived in such extraordinary condition today, it's a bit pricey, but it might be something for the millionaire out there who's watching this, who is come to appreciate his or her home a little more today, as I think we all are, and our own environments have become crucial, whether they're now workspaces as well as places to enjoy. It might be something to if you have a big ceiling, you can put it in there, or a museum as well, obviously, is one. But do note, so it's not a picture you could hang on the wall one way or the other. It doesn't work that way. It has to be seen from down below. So with its perspective treatment, but someone out there might have a big empty ceiling where it would be good to find a home, just as it did in its original place in Venice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll take it. We're doing a sale right now. Hold that for me.
I see your ceiling, but you've got to deal with that chandelier. Yeah.
The chandelier is a problem.
Yeah.
It would look great in your office, Peter.
I think you're right. Look at this.
Yeah,
I mean, I can take this chandelier down. I'm working on it now. I'll be right back. Thank you all. Inspiring, fantastic quality, beautifully presented. You're so eloquent. Everybody should unmute so that we can chat. This is great. Thank you. My mind is buzzing with ideas and things that you've touched upon. If I may just jump in, Katie, I'll turn to you in a second, but I wonder, you know, what I heard mentioned in several different ways just now was the idea of authenticity and looking at things that ring the bell of our humanity and or the value of nature, that this is a strange time and people are looking at such subjects perhaps a little differently than they did 3 months ago. We don't know how long this will last. It may last a good long time, or it may dissipate back to the fast track once the vaccine is discovered. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, though, in terms of feedback you've been getting regarding, for example, the preciousness of walks in the park. I've been hearing a lot of New Yorkers talk about that who never used to mention the parks before. They were all busy jumping into taxi cabs and flying out of JFK, or the notion of, indeed, a gathering, a group of people. You know, that actually means something different than it did recently. Thoughts on any of that?
Well, I would just say, certainly in terms of a gathering, I watched an opera online that was filmed in Matera in Italy, among the people in a big piazza. It was quite an interesting production, Cavalleria Rusticana, and I cried. I cried because I missed so much that communality, and and it's going to be a while before we can get back to it. So I think we really are appreciative of many of the things that we took for granted, and I think the stress of the virus has given all an awareness of the emotional, our own emotions, and how important the emotional content is of works of art. If I can just say, and not to, because I love all art, really. I love some more than others, but so much of it, of contemporary art, let's say, not the artists that we're speaking about, who are obviously alive and well, but so much of that is based on intellectual ideas, and I think that doesn't really carry a great weight today. I just think that we all are striving for a deep connection to emotion and to reality and to nature. Yep. I'm distracted by a dog.
So. Welcome to our world.
A very important part.
Yes. Anyone else on those themes?
I wanted to add, Dina and Katie, especially painting from life, like as artists, that pace that Peter, you say has changed in everybody. Like people are going for walks in the park in New York City, and because they have time for it now. And I just feel like this sense of urgency has dissipated, and there gets to be more focus on what's actually important, not necessarily urgent. And it feels almost like a coming home as an artist, because I don't know too many people that can stare at a tree for 2 hours at a time, or at this landscape or a flower, and just be like completely zoned in on it and take that time. So it's something that we do get to do as artists, but then, even the normal flow 3 months ago was for me, it got so crazy, and just to have everything like quiet down, it feels like this kind of homecoming to being an observer and getting to take time, because it takes so much time when you're working from life, or not even, just painting, and you're observing this, let's say, a tree in the park for hours, and it's a really beautiful thing that artists get to do. And it feels like I don't have to feel like there's other things vying as much for my attention. So I'm really happy in that regard.
I actually, so I was thinking about, well, the exact thing that you were saying, a few weeks ago, the people who, especially New York, was such a huge rush. On the other hand, and everything has slowed down. On the other hand, so I've been, quarantined with my two small, energetic children, and I'm a single parent, and it's been 2 months of this, and I don't feel like my life has slowed down. I feel like and I don't want to sound, negative. Like in one hand, I'm really grateful. Everyone, I have a huge family. Everyone is healthy. Everyone is healthy. Nobody's dead. I do what I love for, for a living, and, and I'm somehow making a living at it. That being said, I feel like I've never been busier. Life has never been kind of more chaotic than my life has been over the last 2 months, just because, it's a 4-year-old and a toddler. And from the moment they wake up at 6 a.m., they just, like they're very high, like high energy, high need. And I found myself waking up at, like I try to wake up before them. So, to basically get some drawing done, because it's the only time I really have. So I wake up at 4, and I've just realized that it's been months since I, never mind slept till 6, but like it's been months since I woke up at 5. Like it's just been, and it's just this constant thing where it's every day I wake up and I do this, and those 2 hours kind of help me keep sane. And then I take care of the kids all day, and then they go to bed at 7, and I have maybe 3 hours in the evening to do, kind of either to do art or just to stare at the ceiling because I'm exhausted. And I feel like I can't wait. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but just I fuck the new normal. I like I want to go back. I want daycare back, and
Yes.
reopen. And after all of that happened, I'm tired of wearing masks, and I want to see the bottom part of people's faces so I can see if they're smiling or frowning. I don't know. I just want to hug a stranger, and
Yes.
this is, I think right now people are loosening up a little bit, just even mentally. But for a while, I kind of felt like people got both, or especially at least I did, both claustrophobic because you're in, kind of inside too much, and agoraphobic because they're afraid of being outside because, they're afraid of getting infected. And in my case, like I'm, just like most people, I'm both an introvert and an extrovert. You have to be a little introverted to be an artist. And with the small kids, I can neither be an introvert because I'm around them all day long, nor an extrovert because I'm not really around people. And overall, I mean, it hasn't been an unhappy time, but it's been so hard. And I don't know about you guys and how you've all been dealing with this, but in just I've never been more exhausted than I have been kind of recently.
That's valuable to hear. Thank you. We have to remember that. Absolutely. That everyone is going through different experiences, and there are commonalities and big gaps. Yeah. Katie, what are your thoughts on any of this?
Well, I think that anyone at home with small children right now is it's not hard, it's impossible. Like your life is impossible. Those of us that don't have small children are really lucky that we can kind of take this time.
That you haven't made the decision to reproduce. I totally hear you.
Yeah, so I really I've been in touch with a lot of my friends who have children, and yeah, this is a completely different experience for anybody who has small children or who are homeschooling, and especially my friends that are artists as well as mothers and fathers. Yeah, this has really put a wrench in their painting, for sure, their work. So I mean, it'll end. That's the only, it can't be like this forever.
No.
You know, someone a few years ago, I remember someone talking about just, you know, a kind of impossible situation that they were in between work and kids and spouse and aging parents. And he said something that stayed with me, which was that we can deal with just about anything as long as it's finite. And, you know, I adore my kids and I adore painting. And, you know, I'm so happy about so many parts of life, but it has to be finite. I mean,
Yeah. That's a really good point. And that leads very neatly to a conversation perhaps about how this is going for us economically, commercially, and so on. What I hear from a lot of our fellow art world people is that great art is being made either full on or in Dina's case, you know, where time allows, and that there is this growing supply of really fine art that is ready to be seen at some point, like immediately online, or maybe down the road in a gallery show where people can actually walk around and look at the walls. I guess the question I've got for all of you then is, how are things going in your section of the art world? And what do you anticipate in the next, let's say, 3, 6, and 9 months? How do we feel? Knowing that none of us has a crystal ball to know when the vaccine will arrive or a treatment that will kind of bring things back to more normal. But what are your concerns and delights? Let's start with Robert, just because I'm picking on you because you do run a gallery.
Well, strangely enough, the gallery's been pretty active. I've been way too active. I think I've been working much harder in the last 2 months than I have. Not that I normally, I don't usually slack off, but I mean, everything is harder to do because it seems to take twice as long to do everything virtually, and so it's been difficult. Also, spending the time and just trying to figure things out, keeping up with things. So we've had 2 museum sales, which is really quite amazing. One had been in the works for a long time. The other one was rather new, and we've sold a couple of pictures online. And
Great.
so, which is strange because I've been one of the people who've always felt that you need to see a painting in person, and I still believe that way. But we have there's a new, there are people that look at art and are so used to looking at things and doing things and shopping things without seeing them. So, you know, we're here to satisfy that as well.
Right.
And I've been very busy. We're going to be doing an online catalog of old master paintings, 19th century paintings, at a kind of more accessible price point than the $2.5 million Tintoretto ceiling, with people we think will be a little more comfortable buying things with, you know, with shipping included and with prices posted, and in a way that may make it a little easier to do it. But in terms of major initiatives and plans for the fall and plans for exhibitions of the artists that we have, I'm waiting to do that, to make any plans. And I think I think that we need not to plan too much at this point, because we really don't know when things are going to be happening. So much of the contemporary art world, and even the old master world, is socially based. Gallery openings, meeting other people, talking about these things, and I think we can shift to a certain degree some things to online only, but other things not. I mean, speaking about, Fine Art Connoisseur is kind of an old world way of looking at things, and it has a nice online counterpart, but it is not looking at a painting or a drawing in person. It's an introductory way to seeing something and experiencing it and learning about it. And I think whether the balance in terms of traditional print media or online media will continue, certainly that's one thing, but it is a way of introducing things and an experience of it. And I don't want to go too much into the online world, because I do think ultimately people are going to want to look at the works of art in person. However, if we do an exhibition in the fall, I don't know whether we're going to have an opening with over a day or 2 days. I mean, it kind of loses the fun of it. But we have a lot of wine, and we can spread it out. We can spread it out over time and try to adapt as best we can. So strangely enough, it's been we've been able to survive. We've been able to keep our employees. We've able to get a PPP loan,
Sure.
and so it's a small gallery, but we're still functioning and fully staffed and still working every day.
Every day. That's great news.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. How about Richie? Tell us about you and also the galleries that you were showing us in the captions of your images. How are things going?
Yeah, so I mean, it's as I think you are all on the East Coast, and I'm way over here in the West, and I've been quite cut off from everything, but it's really interesting because it's quite a different feel as what I'm gathering than certainly New York City of how shut down things are. I mean, we have such a low population density that the gallery that the Rose Show was in, they actually had a opening where they just allowed a couple people in at a time throughout the whole day, and that's actually the first gallery that's open that I've heard of. Most are really shut down, and there's no immediate plans put in place because we just don't know how long it's going to go. But as Robert was mentioning, I've been quite shocked of how much art is actually selling online, and through exhibition that decided to put instead of having the full opening where people can actually come, they've done it online and then have a video component to it. And so it's great to see how galleries and artists are being creative and figuring out how to get work out. And so that being said, one of the things that just breaks my heart is that people don't actually get to come see these works. I don't know how many solo shows I've seen are postponed or canceled, and or else they've had it online, but I just know for that artist, they're like, but these are meant to be seen and looked at from different angles. And so that's been super challenging, but I've been very impressed with the galleries around here. And it sounds like on your side of the country that have really maintained sales and staffing. And I think that's really incredible. And I've just from the collectors that I have been in contact with, it seems like everybody is very, they want to keep supporting art because it might not be this food essential, food shelter, but it's like essential to I feel like the spirit of humanity. So people are getting that, and they're just knowing that and really being supportive. So I'm kind of blown away by that. But you guys, I can't wait till it opens.
I have two questions for you that are generated from what you just said. Number one, the question of, are you getting requests from the galleries to provide, for example, video or audio commentary about your works that would bring those images on the website to life? That you're so eloquent, and what you were describing about the landscapes doubled my pleasure in looking at them because I understood more about what you are after. So that's my first question. What about that? Is that something you would like to do?
That's a great idea to have that come from the artist, I think. And that's what hasn't happened yet. The gallery has done, a view through the gallery or whatnot for each show. But I think that's a fantastic idea because, really for myself, I want to connect people with art.
Yeah.
And when I actually get to talk about it, people, you go from oh, that's a nice image perhaps, or oh, that maybe made me feel something. But then when you get to tell more about it, you get to know the artist, and you're so much more drawn to it. So I think that's a fantastic idea, Peter.
And the second question that I had was simply about, do you feel that right now in this weird terrain that artists without a reputation already are more at risk? Folks who bought your work before know how good you are. They don't need to be in front of the picture to know you made it well. But someone brand new may not be proven yet with
Yeah.
the online buyer. What are your thoughts on that? Anybody?
I mean,
Start with Richie.
yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there's a certain collector base that being familiar with your work, they know the quality that they're going to get, so they don't have to question that. But yeah, certainly, I mean, I'm kind of an emerging artist, and so there's such a collector base that hasn't probably seen a lot of my work in person, and so yeah, I think that's definitely an obstacle and challenge. And like all you, I would prefer to see a painting in person, and so that is a challenge, and I don't have any answers to how to reach that, but I think promotion and group
I have a thought
Okay.
on that, but I want to hear from Dina on any of this first. I don't want to keep going. Dina.
I'm actually afraid things are going to get worse. So I agree with both Richie and Robert. As like so far, things have actually like art sales haven't haven't gone down as far like as much as I saw. And
Right.
I put together this fundraiser, and kind of a surprising amount of the work sold. And I think people are like what Richie said, people are trying to, we're in this weird time, people are trying to support the arts. I think we haven't seen the full economic impact yet. And the guy that is going to buy the $2.5 million Tintoretto might have enough money both for that and for a fully stocked underground bunker in New Hampshire where he can sleep himself for the next pandemic. But I think I think in a few months, if the economy doesn't reopen, people are going to tighten their belt, and they're going to cut out the non-essential stuff. And they're, I think right now people are actually being incredibly generous with their money, and I see artists and musicians being incredibly generous with their time. And overall, there's a lot of good feeling. I feel like in a few months, a lot of people are going to be like, oh I've been unemployed for 6 months, and people are not going to be able to afford to be as generous. So God, I feel like I just keep sounding negative. I'm
No.
grateful for how kind of for how many online sales have happened through with kind of just with all the places that I've been working with. Like I feel like but I also feel like in 6 months it might be economically worse than it is right now.
Yes, thank you. We need to hear that. Absolutely. I think that's a really valid point. I wanted to chime in on one thing, and that was to Richie's point about, to be able to appreciate the intricacy of Dina's draftsmanship. For example, wouldn't it be lovely if dealers and other purveyors, and perhaps the artist himself or herself, use different filming technologies to get closer to it, not just here's the shot overall, like we saw on the slide deck, not just the walk through the gallery with the works on the wall, but raking light to show us the texture of the surface. This is all doable now at very low cost. I am craving that myself, because when I am shown websites, I feel sometimes it's a bit flat. I don't realize, first of all, scale to a point that was made earlier. I want a human being standing next to it so I can get a sense of how big or small it is. And also that texture that I'm missing so badly can be conveyed with a few lighting tricks that are not that pricey.
It's also not that hard to show something in context.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the show that opened yesterday that Katie was in, so there's a virtual, and that gallery's always had an augmented reality component. So I think it wasn't very hard for them to kind of jump into a virtual gallery. But they did a walkthrough, and Katie was one of the artists that that we spoke to, and they would show each of the works. They'd show it on the wall next to the other works so people could see the scale, but they would also show it in context and in the artist's kind of studios. And I think Instagram has actually been completely invaluable for figurative art in general, even before all this started, because it kind of broadens the audience of I think people are craving kind of skilled work with an emotional component, and not just and in my opinion, a lot of what's been going on in Chelsea over the last however many years has been really, it's been kind of intellectually interesting while visually really, really bland. But I think Instagram is so simple, and it can show so much more than just a website, and it's something that's at all of our fingertips all the time.
Yeah, you've been very canny with the digital communications, Dina. I'm so impressed to hear more about that. Katie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, just to plug Dina really quickly, one, I've just been so impressed with everything Dina has done during this quarantine and the pandemic with, as we've heard, 2 small children. It's really wonderful. And I was lucky enough to participate in a show she curated, which the opening was a virtual opening last night. And it was so interesting. Well, before I get to that, also Dina teaches Instagram for artists. So Dina teaches these workshops that teach artists how to understand the algorithm and to utilize the app to like a greater potential. And I took the class, gosh, it was only probably like 4 months ago, but it seems like a million years ago. And it was amazing because I'm like, oh, I'm addicted to this app anyway. I should probably understand what it is that I'm addicted to. And yeah, so that it was just great. So I urge anybody watching this who wants to learn more about Instagram, whether you're an artist or not, it applies across anybody using it. So Dina is amazing.
Great.
And this, thinking about things that Robert said and that Ritchie said, and then this virtual opening we did last night, and it's really interesting to me that I thought, okay, this is just not like galleries are this is gonna be rough, and it will be rough, I'm sure, and everyone is struggling right now already in different ways. But as Dina was saying, it like we're in for a long road ahead. But the opening was really fun last night. I was sitting exactly where I am right now, just in my studio, super comfortable, wearing leggings. And I did put on lipstick for the first time since quarantine. And it was so fun. It was a totally virtual gallery space, but all the paintings were hanging next to each other so you could see the different sizes. And then we kind of walk around and zoom in on a painting. And then I think there were maybe 6 or 7 artists that they kind of picked out to talk about their work, even though there were 40 artists in the show. And I think there were about 200 people on the Zoom call.
Wow.
So and I was just thinking, like, I couldn't talk to 200 people at an opening.
I was very skeptical about it.
I was too.
And I helped put the show together, and I honestly, I was skeptical and terrified, because I was like, how are we going to talk to 200 people? It's going to turn into madhouse. Who's going to moderate this, etc. But it was actually a lot of fun and kind of worked.
I think it was great, and I actually ended up getting a couple different messages via Instagram afterwards last night of people saying how much they enjoyed it, which was so great. And yeah, I'm thinking about this and adding, I'm, of course, like, obviously I'm a super traditional painter, and, I'm just desperate for people to see paintings in person. And I feel so strongly about the emotional content being conveyed that way and all of these things. But yeah, and thinking about things that Robert has done at his openings over the years, and how he generally hosts a conversation between himself and the artist. And I was thinking, when he showed Anthony's painting of Time, I've known Anthony for a long time, over 10 years. We studied together at GCA, and he's a very good friend, and I know him really well. We talk about painting a lot. I see him a lot. And in hearing him talk about the painting, I learned so much about him that I didn't know. And so much, it was just an amazing conversation, especially with Robert kind of drawing it out of him. And it's remarkable, all the symbolism and everything in that painting, and the relief sculptures that he made to then paint the architecture. Like, he's a crazy genius. But But I was thinking, yeah, that was a packed room at Robert's Gallery, but I mean, there was maybe only 30 people there, and we were pretty packed in like sardines. So there is something about this time where maybe, even though seeing things in person and interacting in person together, but being able to reach a broader audience, and especially to talk about our work in this way that tends to only happen in person. And like Ritchie, everything Ritchie said about his pieces, I've known Ritchie for a few years, and I didn't know a lot of that stuff, and I've so admired those paintings, and yeah, it just feels really special. Like I'm like able to dig deeper into some things. And
can I ask, can't we do both? Can't we have the event on site and have 30 people fully engaged? And then, of course, the exhibition continues with people coming by to see it one-on-one or 10-on-10. But also these digital programs that are reaching large numbers of people who will never get to the gallery because they live across the world. I think it's possible, and we need to be more aggressive and proactive about that. Dina.
I think that's the future. Sorry, I interrupted Robert.
No, that's fine.
But I think I'm hoping that in a year, because people have a short term, a tiny memory, we'll have a vaccine and no one is going to remember the coronavirus, pandemic other than this weird dark blip. But I do think it'll change some amount of stuff, and it might actually be a while before being in a room packed full of people like sardines is going to feel attractive to a lot of people. Right. Especially to a lot of like older people with money who would be most at risk, but also most likely to buy art. But right. I do think that is that's what Peter said, is that's the future that will be happening. What we'll learn from this is some amount of personal connection and reaching a broader audience is possible, and I think that people are going to have openings, people are going to have maybe like the show run, and after that they'll do they'll put together like a virtual walkthrough or something, or a virtual artist talk where a huge amount of people will be able to attend that wouldn't have made it otherwise. And so there are opportunities to all
Robert.
Yeah, I was just going to say, speaking about the evening we had with Anthony, and one also did with Pamela, one did with our portrait show, a contemporary portrait show that we did in the fall. I hate the fact that we didn't record it because they were so interesting, and also
they're so good,
and spontaneous, and the one with Pamela was with a historian of the fascist era and who knew all the sites, and it brought out a tremendous amount of new information, and like Katie, I had been showing Anthony's things and pictures and drawings in an exhibition. I didn't know the depth of the symbolic quality, the meaning. What Anthony can be somewhat laconic, but then when the button is turned on and the switch is turned on, it's phenomenal in terms of describing what the background is of the art and how it came to be made. And so I know as a dealer, I've been pretty resistant to this sort of thing, as well as for the kind of thing that you, Peter, were talking about videos and up close, showing the issues of the text and education, these educational things, both broadly and specifically. Yes. And so that is something that probably will be changing even when we get back to whatever normal is.
Right. So whatever that is, exactly. That's just great. I think recording is key now, because all of that is otherwise vanished into the air.
And was that Zoom opening recorded from yesterday? I'd be interested to see that.
I was wondering about that. Katie and Dina, was that recorded?
Yeah, it was. I saw the little record button pressed.
Great. Excellent. That's great. And remind us the gallery name, the entity that we would go to online?
It's sugarlift.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Just want to get that in. And by the way, Dina, you're teaching about Insta. Is that formally operated, or do you do that ad hoc? Like, is there a program that we could sign up for as artists or others, or how does it work?
It's not a program, because I don't think anyone needs to be in a program about Instagram. I think everything you need to know about Instagram could be, it's not very interesting, right? Making art is interesting. Right. Messing around with Instagram is not interesting, but it's really, really necessary. especially for, you know, like for artists, for galleries, for curators. It's just a class that I used to do it for various art schools all over New York.
Okay, right,
Now,
I see, yeah.
now I do it online, so I just twice a month I offer an online seminar, and I keep it pretty small so I can actually research everyone's work before that, you know, before that.
Okay, I see.
And I try to keep, you know, like I try to teach professional artists as a, and it kind of makes me feel like it makes me feel like I'm like, I don't think I could teach painting online. I'd be too scared. And I think it would take forever to learn anything. But with Instagram, it's very finite, like an hour and a half, and I basically taught everything, you know, like everything you've ever wanted to know is probably
Understood, right. We're gonna have to begin wrapping up. I don't want to keep you here forever. You're busy people. Any final comments or questions or observations from anyone?
I have one thing I'd ask, and it's really to the artist, and that is, to what extent do you think this period?
Magic.
The doorbell.
That's fine.
That's a nice doorbell.
To what extent do we the artist? To what extent do you think your art will be changed? I mean, as an art historian, I look back at there's the period of the Black Death, and in Siena in the 14th century, and there's a definite change in the art when it's been written about and observed. We're of course very different societies today. I mean, there's the practical issue of not being able to go out and working. Maybe many artists working more on still lives and working from reference photographs or drawings than they had before. But I wonder whether there might be something more subtle and an attitudinal change in the art, and also whether any artists are going to be seeking to record or respond to the pandemic in their art in a way that will have greater resonance in the future.
Richie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think certainly there will be changes like, okay, I can't get outdoors, I can't do this, I have to alter the way I work or the subject matter or how I paint the subject matter. But I also, so there's those immediate changes, but I always think like for myself, when I'm experiencing the world, there's like this funnel, like stuff's just coming in that I know about or I don't even know about. And certainly this pandemic is quite a historical event. And I think, yeah, there'll be people's responses to like try to say something about it right now. But I think just as artists, the sensitivity that we have, it's for myself, perhaps maybe at least it's going to be more of like something will come after, because, and I don't know what that is, but certainly there's new stuff, like every dream I have has the pandemic in it. And it's pretty wild how much into our subconscious this is all happening, or at least for myself. And so I know something will come later. And of course there are those immediate changes, but I think there will be a response from artists as they express, in the future after.
Yep.
Will you have more brush fires in your painting?
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
Dina, Katie?
I think there's going to be a renaissance, actually. I think, and probably not from the people with small kids. Like they're not going to be creating their best body of work right now. I think I will, but I might create the best body of work I've ever had once the kids are back to daycare. But I think there's a lot of people having the time to be by yourself with your thoughts and kind of making work not necessary, not necessarily to sell, but just the kind of work that you've always wanted to make, because we don't know how long this thing is going to be around. And I think people are going to be making the best work of their life right now. And it's going to be, known as the Corona Renaissance or the Corona set. Oh, that's a terrible pun. I'm so sorry. But I like, honestly, one of the things I look forward to a year from now is seeing the really, really phenomenal art, like actually like Katie's solo show, which was, kind of done mostly in quarantine. And I guess it opens in September, hopefully in person, but your work is so beautiful and possibly got deeper from having to do it on your own without any of the usual things that you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for the segue. Yeah, I've definitely felt a shift in my work, like pre-quarantine, post-quarantine. I was working on really like as you can see behind me, like there's all these blue paintings. I was working on these really colorful kind of chromatic pieces, and then once this all hit, that just felt like really wrong. Like I was like, I can't keep doing the same thing that I was doing. Something has to change. And it was just, and this is like super personal and less global thinking, but just sharing my personal experience. I found it really hard to be in my studio surrounded by the paintings that before I started making new paintings. So I kept painting outside, even though it's kind of cold in New York still in April, but some of these magnolias behind me, I did in plein air, and that was helpful for me just to, like, I have to get out of the studio and try to process things. And it's been a really wonderful time to connect with our loved ones, of course, and kind of prioritizing that. And I've been kind of talking with my painter friends a little bit more than I would normally do, especially the ones that live all over. And in some of those conversations have been really helpful just in terms of processing everything. And kind of, you know, a lot of us have struggled to make stuff, and anxiety, and especially with, you know, being in New York and all of these things. So it's been really helpful to have friends help process, as well as I had this kind of funny realization that I can actually let my work kind of hold me now in this time. Whereas I guess before I was just like, you know, making stuff, trying to make beautiful things, and tend to be more joyful paintings. And I realized, oh, I can still paint flowers, but I can let them hold some heavier emotions. So yeah, so it's been, that's just like my personal experience, but it's been really interesting to kind of go through that. And of course, my husband is just like carving marble. Nothing's different.
Those sculptors,
he's like, you have a photo show. You need to work. Like, why are you're like journaling and like, we're all different. We all process things differently.
That is absolutely right.
Your frustration out by hacking away at marble.
Feels good. Feels very good. Well, I want to thank all of you for your eloquence and thoughtfulness. Really, it's been a pleasure. I know our listeners and viewers will be grateful too, and you should expect lots of emails through your websites. I just want to finish not only with thanks, but also just a few reminders. Streamline Publishing, which has put this together, is also trying to do its part to help. Every day at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, we have a 3-hour segment from one of our Streamline art videos. It's a chance to watch a master painting or drawing. If you go on Facebook and look for Streamline art video, you'll find that free content there. Also, we have a program now where Joseph McGurl, the great landscape painter, has donated a work of art to the initiative. It's paintinggiveaway.com, so everyone is welcome to register for that. We also are looking forward still, nonetheless, to our annual Figurative Art Convention and Expo. That's scheduled for October 29 through November 1 in Baltimore. We're going forward with planning for that. We have 4 days of activities with many, many great master artists teaching their techniques, and also lectures and panel discussions as well. And finally, every Friday, in fact, today happens to be Friday, we have a virtual gallery walk. You can just go on to fineartconnoisseur.com and link onto that. We're trying to highlight the great works that galleries are presenting now online only. So it's just a little bit of community that we're doing here. We want people to feel like they're heard and that we support every aspect of this art world, whether it's a dealer, an educator, an artist, an auction house, whatever. We're all in it together. Thank you again, everybody. Take good care. Have a good holiday weekend as much as you can. Enjoy whatever sunshine we've got coming, and let's all keep in touch.
Thank you all.
so much,
Katie.
everybody. So good to be
Bye.
with you all.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Katie. See you
Thank
later.
Katie.
Bye.
Bye.